That doesn't mean civil rights lawyers, it means lobbyists, and a couple of other concentrations of power, mostly around the financial services, lobbying, and so on. So that's what one would guess would be the tenor of the actions taken. And everything that's happened since just accords with it. I mean, the first action was a selection of advisors. Well, the first one was Joseph Biden, vice president, who's an old-time Washington insider, kind of a Democratic centrist, sometimes a little bit to the right of the main, strongest supporter of the Iraq War in the Senate. It's just like a kind of kicking your supporters in the face, but people went along with it. The next major appointment was Chief of Staff. That's very important. That's who controls the agenda pretty much. Rahm Emanuel, the strongest supporter of the Iraq War in the House. Also the recipient of more funding from the financial services industry than any other, maybe anybody in the House, but certainly way at the top. He himself has a background as an investment banker. He was asked, he had an interview with the Wall Street Journal after he was appointed, in which he was asked, what are you going to do with what they called the left-wing barons in the Democratic Party, like Barney Frank, the people who are talking about cutting down the military budget or shifting taxes so as to, encourage alternative energy and things like that. He said, no need to worry about them. We're pragmatic. We'll be able to control and marginalize them. That's Rahm Emanuel. Then comes the economic advisors. Of course, the country's in a hideous economic catastrophe, getting worse. Who are the economic advisors? Well, go back to the investment theory of politics. The leading one was Robert Rubin. He was Secretary of Treasury under Clinton. His main task, his main achievement, was to undermine the Glass-Steagall Act. That was New Deal legislation that protected commercial banks from risky investments. So it separated them from investment firms, insurance companies, and so on. So the Glass-Steagall Act protected them. Rubin was able to dismantle that, so they all came together. The particular corporation that benefited was Citigroup, which was going to become a financial supermarket or something like that. They had a bank, Citicorp, which incidentally had repeatedly been rescued by federal bailouts under Reagan and since. But they were protected to some extent by the legislation. Okay, Rubin eliminated the legislation, quit the Treasury, became a director of Citigroup, which profited immediately from the opportunity to pick up these extra firms. One international economist, Tim Canova, wrote at the time that this is an obvious violation of the Ethics in Government Act. He ought to be on trial, but no. So he's a director of Citigroup. You know what's happened to Citigroup. They're bankrupt, essentially. So you guys have to bail them out, as usual. They've already gotten tens of billions of dollars. They're trying to separate out the bank from the risky side parts. In fact, going back pretty much to what they were before they coalesced. And Rubin made his pile and then retired or left. And he's now the leading economic advisor. His disciple, well, actually, he was replaced by Lawrence Summers. He was the next Secretary of the Treasury. His great achievement was to block congressional legislation that was trying to regulate exotic financial instruments, derivatives, credit default swaps, and all that business. So he managed to block that. So they're deregulated. Okay, that's another major element in the current financial crisis. Nobody has a clue who owes what to whom. Those are the famous toxic assets, which taxpayers are now expected under Obama's program to pick up and somehow do something with, because you can't figure out who owes what to whom. Now there would be a way to figure it out, and that would be to take over the banks. I mean, the banking system is effectively bankrupt. So the taxpayer is supposed to bail it out. That's the way our system works. Cost and risk are socialized, profits privatized, not just in the financial industries, but everywhere. So the natural thing to do is for you, in a democratic society, the public would take over the banks. Now, we're supposed to hate that idea. It's called nationalizing, which is a terrible thing. That's just another aspect of the fear and hatred of democracy. If it's nationalized, it means there's a Kremlin up there which runs it, and that's no good. And that's probably the way it would be here. But in a functioning democracy, there would be popular control of the banks. That's the government. What's the government supposed to be in a democratic society? But those ideas are completely foreign to our whole way of thinking. I mean, you see this kind of dramatically on April 15th, when you're supposed to pay your income taxes. The picture that we live with here is there's this alien force out there, the government, which comes from Mars somewhere, and they're taking away our hard-earned money so that they can, give it away to illegal immigrants or something. But suppose you had a democratic society. Well, you'd welcome April 15th. I mean, that's the day when we get together and fund the programs that we democratically have decided are the right programs for our community. That's so foreign to the way of thinking here that it sounds like a different language. Okay, another aspect of the same phenomenon. We don't know the details of the current. They've already spent $350 billion giving it away to the banks, just given away, nothing said about it. And the theory is supposed to be when you give $350 to the banks, they're going to do what you would like lend the money. I mean, what world are you living in, I mean, you give $350 to the banks, they're going to stick it in their pockets. I mean, obviously, which is what they did. They recapitalized, they spent it on mergers and acquisitions, some lending to federally guaranteed borrowers, but they're not going to do what the public wants. Why on earth should they? That's not the way a capitalist society should work. It's not a benevolent society. You're supposed to do things for yourself. The Associated Press tried to find out. They're the only ones who inquired, apparently, as far as I could tell. They did try to find out what the banks had done with it. So they sent reporters to the main banks. And they were greeted with kind of astonishment, like, what are you doing here? It's none of your business what we do with the money that you gave us. You're supposed to give us money, and we do with it what we feel like. So go away. Not one bank was willing to tell them anything. Most didn't even let them in the door. It's irrelevant. Well, that was the first $350 billion. Now, what's happening to the next $350 billion? Well, we don't know, because these things are done basically in secret. But it'll probably be pretty much the same. There's such popular anger against the banks by now, and Wall Street altogether, the public just wants to tear it down. Maybe they should. But so Obama had to make some kind of a gesture, and he did. He said, we'll put a limit on compensation. If you get a bailout, you can't get more than $500,000 a year. That's probably, if that applies at all, it'll be to maybe half a dozen people. That's what accountants and lawyers are for, to figure out ways of getting around that, which they almost certainly will. So it's unlikely that anyone's going to be punished by being restricted to $500,000 a year. But they had to make a gesture. For the rest, we simply don't know. There's no indication that the public will have anything to say about what the banks do. Maybe something, but it's not clear what, if anything. And that follows. I mean, when you're put into office by the financial services industry, that's your constituency. So you're going to do what you can for them. Obama did have a meeting last November of, I think, a couple of dozen advisors. The business press, Bloomberg News, ran through the record of each person's background and so on. And it concluded that these people should not be preparing the next stage of